So our second passage of Scripture comes from Psalm 139, verses 7 through 12. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will cover me and the light around me become night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you.
Well, I hope none of us are so worn out or dulled by life that we didn't get swept up in the joyful riffs, that bluegrass. Bill Monroe's great song, Jerusalem Ridge. But you know it can happen. After we've been here a while, been around the block a few times, paid off our bills for a few months, we can become kind of tired of things, a little tense, a little stressful, and we miss the joy as it flies. And maybe that's why Rabbi Ed Cohn wrote this winsome piece I want to share with you. He said, you know, you ought to die first and get that out of the way. Yeah, and then you go to an old age home until you get kicked out for being too young. And then you get a gold watch and you go to work, right? You go to work for 40 years until you're young enough to enjoy your retirement. And I love this. You go to college and you learn how to party. And then, well, you go to high school and then on to grade school and you become a kid again. You play. You have no responsibility. Then you become a baby. You spend your last months floating. And then you end up as a gleam in somebody's eye.
Don't you ever wonder what happened to that gleam in the eye?
Oh, man.
That crazy, wondrous spirit that we bring into the world?
Yeah, I don't know. This is so much fun for us. And part of the fun is the discussion that we have throughout the week to get ready for this time to share with you all. And one of the ideas that came about as we were talking this week was the essential or the elemental nature of joy. So elements are the primary constituents of matter. They're neither created nor destroyed. They're the fabric of human existence. And what if maybe joy in its essence is elemental to who we are as people? It's kind of hard to know exactly where it comes from sometimes, but yet it's essential to human life and who we are.
Joy at the birth of a child, joy at the recovery of someone that you love from a serious illness or injury, the joy that wells up in the presence of live music like the symphonic accompaniment last week at the Bluegrass Band today.
Rob, you had an experience that you told us about that maybe you weren't sure if you're going to feel a lot of joy in the beginning.
And also, I got to say, I'm getting over the fact that one of the children talked to her about the joy she feels when she hears musicians like this in church. How about preachers?
We didn't get any level on that one, did we? We didn't. No level on that one.
I'm up here a little bruised, but I'm going to move on.
I actually think that was one of my children. I don't know.
So you're right. The story I was telling Luke and Lisa this week didn't start out thinking it was going to be a lot of joy there in this moment, because I love my grandchildren, but when I saw 4-year-old Sadie was very enthusiastic about giving the blessing, I thought, we're going to be here for a while. This food is getting cold. But I laid down my impatience, and I'm glad I did, because I did really hear the blessing. She took us around the world. She started outside. We had the trees and the bugs and everything, and now she brings it inside. She names everything we're going to be eating, and she even says, I even thank you, God, for the broccoli I don't like. And then she started naming everything else on the table, the fork, the spoon, the knife, the plate, the cup. And then she ended with her grand finale, and for the goldfish that I think will soon be coming into our home.
I do resonate with where Sadie started her prayer, though. Think about where we live and the natural world around us, our mountains, streams, the rivers, joy is both experienced and observed in the moments that we and where we live. And I think sometimes I take that for granted, and I forget just how beautiful of a place, and the fact that joy permeates the space where we live.
You had any of those moments?
So Rob asked me this morning. It's funny, this morning driving in, it was dark as I started leaving my house to come in this morning, but about halfway here, y'all know when it's really early, but it's just about sunrise, and the sun's not over the mountains here yet, but it's just close, and you can see that little line on the ridge that's the pinks and the oranges and maybe a little hue of purple in there, and the yellow's coming of the sun. I just wanted to pull over and stop. I couldn't because we had to come get set up, but there was a moment of joy in that, and just the essence that permeates that to the beautiful, beautiful sunrise.
I loved listening to Lisa's reading of Psalm 139, and it ought to hit us that we should walk around thoroughly expecting the kind of moments you're talking about, Luke, and we're describing here, because this poet, this writer, says that we can't get away from the living, loving, joyful Spirit of God. And you can't outrun it, you can't outlive it, you can't outthink it. You can go and make a bed down in Sheol, and it will find you there. And if that's true, then it's going to find us right here, right now. There's going to be moments that I think are so filled with joy that you want to freeze them mid-frame. They demand to be savored. They're a moment that just won't die after 60 seconds.
I remember a story like that. When I was a kid, my sister and I would go up on the mountain and look for shooting stars. We'd take those old lounge chairs, those trifold lounge chairs, and drag them up the hill beyond the light of the house. And we had quilts that were made by great aunts and grandmothers. And I can remember we'd curl up in those quilts because it was chilly, and we'd just lay on our backs, looking up into the sky, waiting for a star to fly by.
Oh, beautiful star of Bethlehem, shining afar through shadows, giving the light for those who long have gone, guiding the wise men on their way unto the place
there's a kind of joy that happens around here a lot. It's kind of indirect. It's not the kind of happiness you find by running after it, but it gets added when you're going after something else. Let me give an example. True story, a group of youth, senior highs, go up to West Virginia, Appalachian Service Project. They spend a week painting houses, building decks, working out in 90, 95 degree heat, and they're back now. And there they are in the church parking lot waiting for their parents to pick them up, and they look like something the cat drug in. They look bedraggled and worn out. So the preacher walks over to a 16-year-old boy sitting on his sleeping bag and says, "How you doing, son?" "I'm okay." "How are you?" He says, "Well, I'm tired." And then there's a pause, and he said, "But it's the best tired I've ever been." Now, do you hear that? Now you call that joy. Now, the 16-year-old didn't jump on the happy train to ride up to West Virginia. He went up there because he wanted to be a part of something larger than himself. He wanted to be trying to figure out what God's doing in the world and how to be a part of it. And when he says, "Best tired I've ever been," that's some of the best joy I know of. You're not really running after just trying to be happy. It becomes a byproduct, a serendipity, something added in the margin to a joyful way of life.
Yeah, something that happens just out of ordinary time.
Surprise.
Yeah.
It's a surprise almost. Yeah.
I don't think the shepherds expected anything out of the ordinary that night. They were just doing their regular routine, They'd moved the flocks up to the high country and back, well, last year on the same path and probably the year before that. And the sheep were quiet and they were comfortable, They knew the shepherds were there, so the night falls and it gives them time to ponder. And I wonder if that darkness that was around them wasn't just around them, but maybe in them. Like maybe somebody was missing their family, or maybe they were feeling the sting of rejection from going through the last village. These people were accustomed to living on the margins. And yet that joy when the angels came just out of an ordinary night, and there it was.
Lisa, that reminds me that a lot of us have kind of ordinary days, You get up, you do the thing that you're supposed to that day, you go through the process that you expect to go through, and it feels kind of normal or kind of ordinary. And one of the things that we see in this story from Luke is that joy is there in the midst, in breaking into this kind of ordinariness. And you had this great story of an experience you had where it was a pretty ordinary day.
Yep.
And you had an extraordinary experience.
Right, yeah, so I used to be a volleyball official. So there was one of...
You have like the stripes and everything?
Oh, yeah. Black and white stripes, black pants, beautiful black shoes. Yeah, so I was there at a game one afternoon, and I was the ref on the floor, and I was waiting for the serve to be called. I've got my whistle in my mouth. I'm checking everybody's lineup, and I'm looking at these girls on the floor. I didn't know any of them. And all of a sudden, this overwhelming feeling of love for all of those girls on the floor. I loved every one of those girls like they were my own children. It's something I've never experienced before or after, but man, it was a flash of the divine.
Bigner talks about this, that kind of elemental nature of joy and love.
This is important because after the first service, somebody said, "Did you guys ever really differentiate between happiness and joy?" And I think this is a clue to it.
It is, and one
on
of the
the
things that's
test.
important is not that happiness. Did I just go? Oh, there I am. Okay,
Yeah.
Sorry. It's not that happiness doesn't include joy, but maybe that joy is something a little more. So hear this quote by Bigner. He says, "Happiness turns up more or less where you'd expect it to. A good marriage, a rewarding job, a pleasant vacation. Joy, on the other hand, is as notoriously unpredictable as the one who bequeathed it."
They didn't own a house, no crib, no toys were waiting. Still they had their love for the child they were new star shining in the sky up above. By its light that winter night, they found peace and perfect love. But if we want to find it, and I know we always will, for that new star is shining for us still. They worried how to feed him. Simple trade was all they knew. It was hard enough to make ends meet, but they were only two. But the cold, the dark, and hunger couldn't take away their joy. And she knew they would find a way for that precious baby boy. There was a new star shining in the sky up above. With its light that winter night, they found peace and perfect love. And if we want to find it, and I know we always will, for that new star is shining for us still. And if we want to find it, I know we always will, for the new star is shining for us still.
One thing that we're aware of as pastors is, as great as this season is, and as joyful as it is for many, it's also for some a pretty hard season. I've talked to some people this week that have to deal with the fact that it was right in these days that they've lost a loved one sometime in the past, or some people in this church. We have 5 roses on the altar of people just been lost to us in the last 10 days. And sometimes I call it a celebration gap. When everyone else is going through a time of great joy and celebration, then sometimes you feel a little dislocated from that. And that's a reality, and we don't want to tiptoe around that today with all the joy we're talking about.
And one of the things that happens is that we search for answers. We ask a lot of questions, and one of the things that we can, as folks up front, and I think all of us, is that we recognize that there are a lot of questions that we have. Voltaire said that we judge a person not by their answers, rather by their questions. Sometimes we have more questions than answers, and this time of year reminds us of some of these big questions that we have when we see an empty seat at the table, or we feel a burden that comes this time of year, and particularly, we do sometimes turn to questions.
And I want to say here this morning, it's okay to ask some of the hard-to-ask questions during this time of year. I mean, I'm sure somebody has said, what is there to celebrate in the midst of affluence and all kind of gift-giving if you're poor? And what is there to celebrate in the midst of family reunions when you're alone?
Why do we carry so much fear? We care so much about what other people think, or we're afraid of being left out. We're afraid of not being loved.
One of the questions that came to me is, we're talking all these things about God coming to be among us in the form of Jesus, and that is a celebration, but why at times does God feel distant?
God called us to welcome the stranger, yet we're in a world now that's shutting its gates. Doors are closing, even hearts are closing.
So here you're going to hear us during this season, hear preachers talk about goodwill on earth, and yet you opened the paper this morning and We know what's happening in Syria or Afghanistan. You might say, this sounds kind of cynical, that you say, what is there to celebrate? Maybe nothing. If the spirit of celebration is reserved only for the lighthearted and the lucky, but it's not. You heard the song about what these parents faced bringing Jesus into the world. And the Jesus that we celebrate, he came into a world as violent and as conflicted as the world we're living in today. But here's what gives me and you reason to celebrate this anytime, anywhere, by anyone. And that is celebrating a God that is showing up in the darkest corners and crevices and cracks of life. And any of us could celebrate that.
Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that I think that this joy is so elemental is because of experience. So it was just over 6 years ago when Annie and I lost our daughter, Gwyneth. Some of you know that. Others of you may just be hearing this. We had a daughter that passed away, and this church was amazing. There were very few moments in the hospital that we were alone. Rob and Julie were there, and others from the congregation, our family obviously too. But there was a moment where Annie and I were there by ourselves, and I don't remember which one of us brought this up or how it came up or where we got to it, but we started making a list of things we were thankful for. Now, I know it sounds a little bit strange, but in that moment, there was this essence that didn't come from us, that brought up thankfulness even in the midst of a dark moment and one of our most difficult days, obviously. And as I thought about joy and I thought about this topic, I couldn't help but think about the fact that our thankfulness is tied to a joy that we don't create, but yet permeates our world even in ways we don't see it or expect it to.
Yeah, I think you've just hit on where we're trying to move today and through this theme. You're taking us from almost joy to altogether. There you were in a moment that no matter what you were experiencing, and there was nothing about that experience that wasn't dark and hard. Mm-hmm. But you were able to give thanks, because I think what we're saying there is a joy that is circumstantially bulletproof. It just has to do with this God who keeps showing up. Even sometimes when we don't see it, we believe that love is there, and the cords of that love can't be severed. So we give thanks.
Yeah, we do. And I think one of the things that's really important to point out is that this does not diminish the amount of grief that I felt or that others have felt. I mean, the Five Roses, others that have lost family members this year or had a difficult situation that has brought life-changing grief. It doesn't diminish the grief. Rather, it reminds us of the permanence of joy and that elemental nature of what it is to have joy in the world.
Yeah, Advent and Christmas are not automatically wonderful for everyone. There's a darkness that can come in, and it's like a fog. It can muffle the music. It dims the light. Happiness is something that just feels out of reach because you can't manufacture it. But joy breaks in. It's the presence of God. And even with the sadness and pain, joy is there. It's like the Gospel of John says, the light shone through the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it.
I just love that too, because it reminds us that joy, love, the essence of God permeates both the darkness and the light. Neither can escape the presence of God.
God's always there. Darkness is not dark to God.
Well, we started with the poet, Psalm 139. Here's another poet. The darkest time in the year, the poorest place in the town, cold and a taste of fear, a man and woman alone. What can we hope for here? More light than we can learn, more wealth than we can measure, more love than we can earn, more peace than we can treasure, because a child was born.
Because a child was born, it takes us from almost to altogether peace, altogether love, altogether hope, altogether joy. And it's just too good not to share.
Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain, Jesus Christ is born. While shepherds kept their watching far inside night, behold, throughout the heavens there shone the Holy Light.
Oh, tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain, Jesus Christ is born.
Shepherds feared and trembled with low above the earth. Rang out the angel chorus that held our Savior's birth. Go tell on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell on the mountain, Jesus Christ is born. Hey, George. Down in a lowly manger, our humble Christ is born. And God sent us salvation that blessed Christmas morn. Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain, Jesus Christ is born. Everybody sing. Go tell it on the mountain.
Love you, man.
How about these guys? Not too shabby, huh? Thank you. So I want to introduce you real quick. On the stand-up bass, we got Kevin Sluter, we got George Buckner on the banjo, and back in the back, we got Richard Folk on the cajon, and of course, that's Darren Nicholson playing the git fiddle and the mandolin. The Darren Nicholson Band. outside, there's a little table outside the chapel. So there's the Balsam Range Christmas CD, and they just put out a new gospel CD, and we got that out there too. Also, Darren has a new mandolin instrumental that he's put out, and so we'd love for you to stop by and grab those. The interesting thing about joy is that it can't be silenced. Part of the theme of this season has been almost to altogether. May this altogether joy fill us, even in those dark places, as we go into the world. Amen.